Welcome to another episode of I Catch Killers. Some of the most annoying and frustrating criminals I came across in my career in the cops were the fraudsters. These are people who think it's okay to rip off other people's hard-earned savings. They usually prey on the trusting and vulnerable. They appear to have no conscience, and it's rare if they ever show contrition, even when they're being caught. Today's guest was a cop for 37 years, the majority of which was spent as a major crime detective. One of his areas of expertise was fraud investigation. He was my go-to person when I needed advice on fraud matters, which often crept into investigations I was involved in. He is truly one of the last great characters in the New South Wales Police. An outstanding detective whose sharp mind and quick wit always put a smile on those around him. I've been looking forward to getting him on the podcast for a long time. Retired Detective Chief Inspector Dave Christie, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thanks, mate. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here, Dave. Yeah. And we haven't caught up as much as we probably should once we leave the cops and head off in our different directions. But how long have you been out for?
4 years now, about 4 years. That's coming up in November. But in some ways it seems like a long time, and in others it's just like it was yesterday when I was going out to Parramatta to work. But
yeah, it's funny thinking Parramatta, turning up there every day. When I see you, a smile comes to my face because I still, it was Hans Rupp's send-off, wasn't it?
Right.
Detective Chief Inspector that we all worked with for a long time. And he send off, I think there was about 300 or 400 people, and they were stupid enough to allow you to be the master of ceremonies.
Yeah. Well, I did quite a bit of that towards the back end of my career. MCing was something I'd done, inside the job and outside of it. But police send-offs are a fertile source of ground, aren't they?
After Hans's send-off, I'm surprised you were still even allowed in the cops, because I think you basically gave everyone in the building a spray, and the higher they were in the rank structure of the cops, the more of a spray they were given. So.
Yeah, well, it's funny that because they don't. Whenever I've done one of those roast-style things, quite often they'll come up to you and say, you've missed me.
Right.
So I put some shit on me as well, will you? Because I don't want to be left out.
They feel left out.
Yeah, so you spread it around.
Well,
but Ruffy had such a celebrated. The name's got to be bullshit, hasn't it? Hands Rupp. I reckon that's got to be a.
Well, it was when he was in the stick-ups, hands are up.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I know.
Could anyone have had a name like that? I think his real name's probably Eugene Smedley or something like that. And if he changed his name to Hands Rupp when he's joined the cops.
Well, you managed with your MC, and you certainly managed to liven up some otherwise dull affairs with the police retirement. But it's good fun.
That's one thing about cops. They're usually pretty easy to, although they can cop a joke.
Yeah.
And most of us have all done some crazy things over the course of time, so it's nice to be reminded of them now and then.
The reputation and the ridicule.
Well, particularly the ones that get further up the tree. You just got to bring them back down to earth a bit now and then, and remind them that they were all one of us at one stage.
And you saw that as your role to make sure that they didn't get ahead of themselves. Very good.
Absolutely.
Hey, what's your story? Why did you join the cops?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I never had any intention of joining the police.
Yeah.
In fact, I was roaming the floors at Grace Brothers at Bondi, I think, on my way to a celebrated retail management career. And after about 6 days, I realised that really wasn't for me. And my father knew the secretary of the police department, as it was then, a guy called Leo Weinberg. So he said, why don't you go down and talk to Leo on Monday, because there was no way I was going to get any time off from leaving Grace Brothers and swanning around considering my future. So it was straight into you're going back to work. And I went down and spoke to Leo Weinberg, and I actually thought I was just going down to discuss life in the public service. And next thing I was downstairs doing an aptitudes test, and I was on my way to joining as a junior trainee. I wasn't even 19. I was just a kid.
Did you go in as a cadet?
Well, the cadets had been phased out.
Right, yeah.
And then they brought this new creature in called a junior trainee that were basically had finished year 12 and were waiting to turn 19. So it was very similar to cadets.
How did you find uniform work? in the cops when you first started? Because it's a bit daunting when you put that uniform on.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I got to be I thought I was the luckiest person in the world, and I probably was, as far as, falling into a job by mistake and or without any ultimate desire to be a cop. And then next thing I was running around Burke Street and doing the initial training thing, and came out. But I actually loved every day I had in the police, and I got stationed out to Mona Vale.
Yeah.
And there was a terrific crew of people there, and some, a couple of really, really funny people.
Yeah.
Who made every day hilarious. I mean, you know what cops are like. They tend to, laugh at things that normal people wouldn't laugh at, or make a joke out of it. I think that's the way we get through a lot of it sometimes. But it was. I think it was. I can remember being a kid then. I was still at home, and my mother saying, you whistle on your way out the door. That and I literally whistled for the 37 years. I didn't have many times where I wasn't enjoying going to work.
I look at the police, and I think every day you never knew what you were actually going to be doing.
Well, that was the best part.
It was every day had potential to be the most exciting day that you've had.
Well, as a young man, and you're full of energy and fit. I mean, probably not in the condition I'm in now, but it's the excitement level, isn't it? And you're chasing people,
and you'd get on the shift. You'd start your shift, and you'd be hoping something dramatic happened. And,
well, that's right. And quite often did.
Yeah.
And sitting around listening to the old yarns from the old cops. It was Some of them were a bit disenchanted, but...
so that was 1980 when you joined?
Yeah, as a junior trainee was 80. I got sworn in 81. Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, there would have been some characters around. I remember I started off at Hornsby, and that was 85, and if these people didn't exist, you'd have to invent them.
Right.
Some of the cops.
Oh,
talk political correctness. No, there wasn't any talk. Appropriate. But it was society was different in a way too.
Oh, totally. I mean, I've always had a repertoire of gags all my life. Up my sleeve, and most of them have become redundant now. You can't. You can't get too many of them out because you got to offend somebody, which is a bit of a shame. But I mean, anyway, the times have changed, and I mean that's the thing with the cops. I mean, you had to, when times started to change, you either change with it or you did the dinosaur thing.
That's right. But some of the characters that help you through, and you had to, as a young cop, I found that I would watch and I think I'll learn a little bit from that person, but not everything that person does. And there was some of these people, and you call them the uniform guys, like and women. They just had the street smarts, didn't they?
Absolutely.
They could speak to anyone. They wouldn't get flustered, no matter what happened. And they were someone that you could rely on.
I think the groups in the police stations in those days. I mean, the back end of my career, I wasn't really near police stations, but in those days, I mean, the detectives. The highway patrol, we had water police down there at 29 Division, traffic people, you name it.
Yeah.
Every section was there, and they all used to mix together, and they all used to live generally in the area as well, not too far away. Unlike today, where they travel all up from all over the place.
The moment they finish, they're out of the area, but and that created. There was that drinking culture. There was a drinking culture in there, and
I've managed to carry that on right through my career. Some would say,
hanging on to that bygone era. But it was nothing. And this is when you talk about it in today's values and the way that we do things. It was nothing that the detectives did play cards at lunchtime in a smoke-filled room, and in the afternoon a carton of beer would come out from the fridge, and
absolutely,
that's the way the world was. But it wasn't just the police; like everything changed. I think from those days.
You just can't imagine people smoking inside a building now, can you? Those days, everyone had one in their mouth, ashtrays on the table.
When they banned smoking in the police stations, there was the only place you were allowed to smoke was the interview room, and I was at a building at Hornsby at the time, and the interview room was beside my desk, And the interview room, you're looking at sort of 8 foot by 8 foot, no windows, just basically a box. That was the only place anyone could smoke, and there were probably 200 police attached to the station. And I had some of my briefs in there, as in files. The paper turned yellow. But that was
that was the way it was.
That was the
the look too.
That was the look.
Hanging out of the corner of the mouth. And
the smoke-filled interview room.
Smoke-filled interview room.
Typing on the manual typewriters, and when those electric typewriters came in, no one thought they'd catch on. The electric typewriter. Don't be stupid.
I can actually remember someone saying to me at one stage, "Why aren't you guys using word processors?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, look, there's no point us using that. Something as sophisticated as that." These manual typewriters, if we make an error, we need to be able to get the Tipex out.
Well, you've reminded me that, we didn't have photocopiers, and so if you were typing up a statement, you had to have 6 pieces of the carbon paper in to make the copies.
That's right.
And if you made a mistake while you were typing, you had to correct all 6 copies.
Exactly. And you had your favourite typewriter, the one that felt good under the hand, under the fingers, And that was, for a detective, that was one of your number one skills, was how quickly you could type and how accurately you could type. You were judged on that as a young bloke.
I know we're reminiscing, but that was the pressure was on when you had to sit down and do a type record of interviews. So you had the cranky detective sergeant talking to the crook, and maybe the solicitor or barrister the present while this interview's going on, and you're this young junior nervous detective.
Exactly, fingers shaking,
trying to type in real time as they're speaking.
If you had a sergeant like I had with Paul Hume, he was the greatest mumbler of all time, trying to actually understand
I remember
the question
Paul,
he was asking.
That would have been hard.
He's a good man.
I still remember we charged a solicitor with a break and enter and all sorts of things, but he was a smart ass, and he could see I was struggling. This was in my early days as a detective, so I was nervous. I was working with a detective sergeant, and so the solicitor purposely used as many big, difficult words to spell as he could whilst I was typing. And I got to give him credit. He made me feel bad and it unnerved me. But he would use these words I've never even heard of, and he was just sitting there smug, watching me struggle as I'm trying to work out how to.
It's all about getting a little bit of leverage, isn't it?
Type the word. What? How long did you spend in uniform?
About 5 years, and I was. I was working up at French's Forest at the time.
Yeah.
So I took on most of the tough assignments, Mona Vale, French's Forest. And
that's the crime capital of
a few other people wanted to do the easy work out of, Bankstown and Redfern, those places. But
they were hiding in Bankstown.
And I said, send me over where the action is. So so I stayed at 29 Division for a while, and a bloke called Brian Gardner came along. He was a bit of a legend.
Yeah.
And he'd come back into uniform, I think, getting promoted.
Yeah.
And they put him in charge at French's Forest, and we were a fairly motley crew up there. But Brian was one of these guys that would take everyone under the wing and have them thinking they were 10 feet tall and charging through cement walls and all for the greater good. He was wonderful like that. But his nickname was Smacker.
All right. Okay.
Smacker Gardner. Yeah. And he actually encouraged me to go and, he wasn't even encouraged. He just basically said, look, I think you should go and try plain clothes. Have you thought about that? And next thing you were.
Yeah. That's how it was in those days, wasn't it? I can't remember someone actually saying, I'm going to put in an application to plain clothes. You got a tap on the shoulder if they.
It was pretty much like that. And I respected his judgment, and the kind of not even in the cops, but the kind of people you gravitate towards. And he was a guy that I had a lot of respect for, and had a great sense of humour. Just the funniest bloke. I've often told a yarn with him down at Manly Court. It's quite legendary in the area when he was in the witness box, and the usual allegations were being made that he'd assaulted. You've assaulted my client, haven't you? And he said, no, I haven't. He said, yes, you did, Sergeant. He said, you viciously assaulted my client in order to obtain the admissions we now hear before the court. Isn't that right, Sergeant? He said, no, that's not right at all. He said, yes, it is, Sergeant. You beat him. He said, no, I didn't. He said, isn't it true, Sergeant? He said that you are known in police and judicial circles as Detective Sergeant Smacker Gardner. The Smackers looked up, looked him straight in the eye, and he said, well, that's true. He said, just as you are known in police and judicial circles as Dirty Dick the Dog Dater. And the courtroom's got into complete uproar. I can remember just people laughing. And, of course, the solicitor's name was Richard, somebody. Yeah, Dirty Dick the Dog Dater. So, bring the court back to order. But I thought, well, he never took a backward step, bro.
Well, that's they're large, sometimes larger than life characters. That and there's a bit of skill there that they don't wilt under the pressure of a witness box.
That's right.
Because it is about intimidation, and certainly when you would have been in plain clothes in the early days, remember you had to learn your statement verbatim.
Yeah. That's right.
And explaining that, what we're talking about here, if you had a hearing, you would type up a statement that might be 10 pages, 12 pages long. For police, for some reason, we had to remember that verbatim. So you would spend the weekend before the court matter basically reading aloud the statement so you could just rattle it off. And
I think it had its good points and its bad points. I mean, you did learn your statement, but as long as you didn't forget about it, when your evidence in chief was over and now the cross-examination starts, But
well, that was once you got through that evidence in chief, when you remembered your statement,
massive weight off your shoulders.
Oh, thank Christ! Now I can actually, But I still, from 30 years ago, can remember bits and pieces of statements that I just had to drum into my head, and it was. They said it was a test of whether the statement's true or not. It wasn't. It was basically a memory test, and it was advantageous for the defence because in front of a jury, if it was a trial, it could make a big song and dance. Oh, Dave Christie didn't remember what was said.
Yeah, that's right.
But it did take up a lot of time.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to be trying it now.
In those stations, and I think in the stations you talk of, like Mona Vale or French's Forest and all that. Because they weren't so busy, you were afforded the opportunity to really investigate crimes. Like if you did get a good job, you could spend time of it. You got any observations about that?
Yeah. Well, when I eventually went into plain clothes, I started at Manly and then was pretty quickly down to DY and had a decent. It might have been 12, 15 detectives there.
Yeah.
And we had some good people. We were fortunate in those days. A lot of guys perhaps came back from the squads for whatever reason, and they either got a bit burnt out or they were getting a bit closer to home or whatever. But you had some really experienced guys there.
Yeah.
I don't think there were some good jobs went around at the time. But yes, you weren't getting smashed like they would have been, out west or. Yeah,
well, there's some stations, you see the busier stations, whether it was Bankstown or somewhere like Mount Druitt, that the work came in so much it was sort of a volume crime, and they didn't have the opportunity to investigate as deeply.
Well, they wouldn't,
Yeah. So I valued time at a quieter station during various stages of the career where you could really have a look at something and
you're learning,
deep.
At that stage, trying to learn the craft. I mean, we had guys like Bob Inkster, who was the detective sergeant,
the legend.
And he was terrific to work under and learn from, just the way he carried himself and the way just the thoroughness and the just his overall demeanour. He took it seriously, but he had a sense of humour as well.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, probably one of the most highly regarded police/detectives right through his entire career, to the day he retired.
His reputation was awesome, and
the snake,
the snake, that the stuff he did with Strike Force Gain and different things. My memory of him, and I quite liked him for it, even though it was totally offensive and insulting what he did to me. I was running an investigation when we were at we were still out at Strawberry Hill, so major crime there, and I was running the Terry Falconer investigation, and we were having trouble finding a strike force room. Space was limited, and we managed to get ourselves a strike force room and had 6 or 7 detectives working in it, and it was a battle to get the strike force room up and running. I didn't know that I shared a common wall between my office and Bob Inkster's office, and I came in one Monday, and there's a hole cut in the wall. The wall's not there; it's just been cut out. Bob decided to expand.
He's expanding the empire.
Expanding his empire, and my stuff was just shoved off into the corner. And I went and I reacted the way you would expect me to react. I was very pissed off. And I went and spoke to Paul Mager, who we know, and he was my supervisor for a long time, and a great deal of respect for him, and he knows Bob. And I said, you know what's fucking happened? They've done this, blah, 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 ranted and raved to Paul. And he said, you can go speak to him if you want. Yeah, like virtually daring me. I said, I will. Yeah. He said, okay, I'll line it up. And I went and said to Bob, you know, I think it's very, I've calmed down a little bit. I think it's very disrespectful. You could have told me you were going to cut my office up and just put all my stuff in the corner. He said, you're right, I'm sorry. And then I went, okay, and I walked out.
It diffused that.
I didn't know where to take it from there. But the point being, I respected him for that. He was a superintendent, I was a sergeant or whatever at the time, and he, stuff you, I want this. And
that's what's going to happen. Yeah, well.
But no, a good operator. And that takes me to one of the jobs that when I was speaking to you before the podcast, the Kalajic murder. Did you were working at Plainclothes Manly at the time, or on?
No, I wasn't. I was just on the. Sorry, I was just on the A list at the time. So you know, you're transitioning from.
Doing a bit of work in uniform and a bit of work in plainclothes. Yep.
And I was working on the uniform car on a night shift.
Yeah.
When that job came in, so we were the first people at the scene of that murder, and it was quite horrific, as you can imagine.
Just to put it into context, so it was Andrew Kalajic was the person that was convicted of the crime, but his wife Megan was shot in bed whilst he laid beside her. Is that the?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, and
he was a high profile businessman at the time.
Yeah, multi-millionaire businessman, had the Pacific Hotel at Manly.
Yeah. What was it like turning up to that job?
Well, I remember my offsider and I, Dolores Slasson was working with me. We were both about the same vintage.
Yeah.
And we were actually on our way back to French's Forest.
Yeah.
It was Australia Day, I think. Well, it might have been after midnight. So creeping into the next day. And it ran in Fairlight. Sort of, you can imagine, we went there with some urgency. It's been a shooting, and then got out of the car and spoke to the ambos. And the first thing we said, how's everyone doing? And we said, well, we haven't been in there. We're not going in there. Some maniac with a gun by the sound of it, you know. So I often look back at that and think, out came the firearms, and in you went.
Yeah.
Really not knowing what you were going to find, but. Straight to the bedroom, him leading the way, and there she was laying in the bed, and she'd been shot twice on the side of the head.
So Andrew met you at the door?
Look, I can't remember now whether he met us at the door or, my memory's not that good as to exactly where he was, but he had been laying down beside, he'd been sleeping beside her when old Billy Vandenberg's come up the stairs and done the job. And I mean, the story's very well documented. It's been, they've made movies and God knows what else. Colin Farrell's playing the Snake, which I thought was, I couldn't believe we found someone with hair to play. Like you would have thought it might have been. They might have shaved him down or something. But
it's TV. You're allowed to.
Unbelievable. Yeah. That's right. So, but. No, I think the thing that stood out that night was Kalajic was just could give you a blow-by-blow description of where he'd been for the 12 hours prior.
Yeah.
He's trying to squeeze a tear out, but was struggling.
And that was what you felt.
Well,
at the
that
time.
formulated part of our evidence was Dolores noted that and said, he was crying, but there were no tears, which was, I don't know whether women hone in on those things better than men, but that was certainly an observation she made. And he was giving us a story about how this bloke must have got in when he was trying to say he'd come in through the sliding glass door off the balcony.
Yeah.
But the sliding glass door, as it opened, it didn't run along the track smoothly, and it had been closed. So he would have been the world's tidiest killer to come in, go bang bang, walk around to her side of the bed, shoot her, back around the other side, out through the sliding door, and then shut it behind him. Didn't
all of which
and fire a couple of shots into the pillow that Andrew was sleeping on, and just happened to miss him. So there was obviously issues to start with, and I guess as young police, we noted that early on and made records along those lines, which were used later on. But it was really my first interaction with detectives in a major crime. And whilst I certainly don't put my hand up to playing any role of any great significance in it going forward, it was great to be part of it. And I think it really got the juices flowing a bit as far as I'd like to do this. This is really interesting, and watching the way it unravelled, and I mean, it had more moves than a Swiss watch, that brief, with ex officio indictments and judicial inquiries.
Oh, it's still playing out, I think, in the public. I read something about it.
Well, Snake was so funny. Like when it went to, got down to the judicial inquiry, which was before Judge Slattery. So, here we go again. And I came in to give my evidence, and Snake sitting there with the crowd, and up I go and take the oath, and is this your statement? Yes. And did you make that statement? Yeah, that's your signature, blah, blah, blah. Yes, yep. Is there any questions? No. Are there any questions? No. So I'm there. I was there for literally 30 seconds, and I walked out. And Inkster just pulled me aside as I walked out down the hall, and he said, "Thanks, mate." He said, "I think you might have turned the tide in our favour."
Once again, the brilliant evidence of
Christie Clouseau's done it again.
Yes.
No. Yes. No. Thank you. But
they're the good times in the witness box.
Oh well, that's right. How lucky was I? But I mean, being a good young constable at the time, I'd written everything in my notebook, so nobody wanted to read that because I had all sorts of observations I was making. So there was a good lesson there.
It's interesting because people often say at murders, do you have an instinct of what's happened and all that? But I think it's. Call it instinct, call it gut feeling, but it's also common sense. You just outlined about the things that didn't quite add up to his story, and you're going to make observations about how you react. Like if you're laying in bed beside someone and that person's been murdered in the bed beside you, there's a certain way that you
would think so. That's right. Certainly you've got that in your mind's eye. I remember Mick Brady was one of the detective sergeants there, and he had a lot of homicide squad experience. And he still rates it as one of the most callous murders he's ever seen. He said to be able to lay next to your wife, no matter how much you may dislike her, and be there when she gets shot by an assassin. I mean, it's pretty hectic. Anyway, that was the way it was. But he's out and about now. I've run into him a couple of times.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it, when you see people go away and you realise how quickly life passes by when you see them out and about. But I remember that job because Jim Williams, who was my first partner in plain clothes, I think he responded on call too. He might have been
he would have been on
the wireless car or something.
Was it E District up there?
Yeah.
So there was DE. He would have been on DE. They used to cover both those districts.
Yeah.
I remember him coming. He was a good bloke. Jim. So they came from everywhere once. As you would with a murder, but of course it had some
high profile.
High profile, and as I say, it played out into movies and God knows what.
Yeah, I remember watching the movie. It was funny watching Snake played in the movie.
Oh, they had all the characters. Like Bob Richardson was, he was one of the sergeants there, and he was just, I found him one of the funniest guys I ever worked with.
Yeah.
Rarely cracked a smile or anything.
Yeah.
He was the driest bloke you'd ever met in your life, but he was the perfect foil for Snake, and the way the two of them went about doing their bits and pieces. And I still laugh at some of the antics he'd get up to. But as I say, he that was a big part of it for me. I used to love the characters in the job. You know,
I think that's and quite often that like public are interested in the true crime stories and all that, but the characters you do meet in the job, and I think it's because the circumstances you find yourself in. Like, it seems so surreal. You've got to laugh at it, and you need someone taking the piss out of you or whatever sometimes just to relieve the relieve the tension.
Exactly. And I mean, I know, having spoken of, I've always had a pretty solid network outside of the cops. Yeah. You know, I had my police friends, but I always had a group of friends totally unrelated to the police. And over the years, they ask you, bits and pieces about the various jobs you might be on. And I remember as time was going on through the career, this is not at the fraud squad because there weren't too many dead bodies rolling out of level 6 at the Parramatta, but a lot of the stuff you saw that was quite gruesome, and spending time at morgues and autopsies and all this sort of stuff, and you used to talk about it. I remember quite easily, and there could be a joke roll off the tongue or whatever it might be, and I remember a mate of mine saying once, he said, "See, most people are never going to see a body in their life, whereas you guys might be seeing them, ad nauseum. People aren't going to go to these terrible car accidents or deliver terrible things like delivering a death message, things like that. They're just things that you have to do as a cop, but you don't. The average person doesn't have to do them. So that's why they're always intrigued with the yarns. That's why they don't make movies about accountants. People they love cop shows, because it's stuff they'll probably never do.
Well, there's so much, you see. Was French's Forest, that was a rescue squad?
Yeah, they had a rescue squad there, yeah.
Like what those blokes see and do, like the car accidents. Like I didn't spend a long time in uniform, but I did, and I still have vivid memories of the horror of the car accidents you'd go to, and the rescue squad.
And they were a certain kind of person, those rescue squad guys. They certainly had some capacity to absorb that. And I mean, it's not easy seeing that. I mean, you see with the amount of blokes that end up burning out, and the bucket gets full. They've seen enough.
Hit the wall with it.
And I mean, I don't think they do it as much now, the rescue scene, is it? It's the fire brigade have got that function.
I know we've still got the rescue squad, but I know there was that demarcation between who attends the accidents and that. But from homicide, at least when I get there, I've got something to work towards. When you see those accidents, it was just sort of, it's an accident. Yeah, you can't direct your anger or anything. But I've seen your sense of humour that you bring to the table, and it was another tragic situation. But remember with the Lint Cafe, when we were after that, and I was doing the crime scene, you had a role there too. But I remember you turned up, and it was a pretty heavy scene. When Ange was running it, Ange Mamolo, who's been on the podcast, he was running the investigation, and there was a few of us homicide inspectors there, and you've turned up as well, and on there, and you were giving it to us the whole time.
I would have taken control, I imagine, would I?
You took control and gone, I don't know what it is. Why do they put these bloody homicide detectives up there on a pedestal? Look at you, you're hopeless. And a couple of things like that, which I think lightened the mood at the time.
That was a pretty heavy duty job, that wasn't it? And, our guys were doing the statements.
That's right.
From the witnesses and victims and things. I certainly don't hold it. Certainly not myself or even the guys that were palling around with me as from the fraud squad as being having specific expertise in those areas. I mean, taking statements and attention to detail is something I guess
something you could
we had some capacity in. But yes, there was a terrible pall of. It was like evil, wasn't it, over the city when that after that thing had been on? It was just. I remember going to work the next morning coming in to sort of start, hello, what are we going to be doing today with this? And I just remember feeling, almost a bit sick in the stomach with it. It was, it was bad.
Well, there was something about that, and I think it was. I've talked about it before and thought about it, and I think it's like just doing the crime scene, and the crime scene was no worse than other crime scenes I've seen. But I think you could relate to it because you actually saw it play out.
Well, that's the thing, wasn't it?
And it was right in the heart and soul of the city, and it was such a public event. But, I remember for the days after it and you coming along, and a couple of little snide comments at us was well appreciated. I don't know if it was deserved, but don't you lot take yourself serious and that type of...
I was just probably getting on the front foot in case you were having a crack at me.
Oh, we were going to turn on you. We're just setting it up.
Yeah, well, I got out quick after that. I thought, 2 weeks on this is enough.
We'll fix this Christie character up. When did you make the move to go into major crime investigation?
Well, I just... finished an exhausting tour of duty as the chief of detectives at Collaroy, which was
right.
You can imagine working there, the nor'easter washing through the window most days, 50 metres from the beach. Anyway, I'd almost eradicated crime down there and decided it was time for a move. Anyway, the bushfires started in 1994.
Yeah.
So they ended up forming that task force, and I went over Boyne, I think it was called.
That's right.
Yeah, Al Milroy ran that. And so I went over to the city for 6 months, roaring up and down the coast of New South Wales looking for a Mariner 31 motor cruiser that we were convinced had started the fire out at Church Point.
Right.
Which, that was one of the better jobs I worked. Never found it, to be honest, but it remained a bit of... I've got a bit of an idea now, I think, how that thing may have occurred. But anyway, as it was, there was just another one of those tragic Christmas...
and that was because I remember that, if it was 94, I remember it was just chaos, wasn't it? There was two or 3 days of chaos.
Oh, and it was, not dissimilar to what we've seen recently, in the recent past. Once they get a hold, off they go. But these were sort of... It took like only 11 hours or something for it to burn from Cottage Point through to Eleonora, which was astounding, the speed it was moving. And then the fire was spotting across the Wakehurst Parkway and was threatening the war veterans' home. When you imagine what would happen if that place went up.
I remember we were doing a murder there and we had a listening... I won't tell the details of the job, but it was a murder investigation. We had a listening post on the Northern Beaches and we had to abandon the listening post because the fire was coming through.
That'd be right.
That was at a crucial time.
Yeah.
Well,
it's all hands to the pump with those things. But anyway, I went over there and to the task force, and then they started. Bob Lysart had kicked off this fraud enforcement agency, and one of my sidekicks said he was going to throw his hat in the ring to see if he could get a start, and said, why don't you come over? There could be some opportunities over there.
Yep.
So I thought, well, I probably tended to roll a bit that way. I was more of an opportunist than having a major strategic plan as to how the career was going to go. And I thought, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And I'm going to the city every day now as it is. So, and I was fortunate enough to get a spot. And
what was I remember Bob Lysart, and I remember when it happened, but winding it back a little bit, like frauds took up a lot of time at local detectives' office, like it was a bounce check and just things like that. It was...
Yeah, I think everybody backed away from frauds. Look, I didn't go to the fraud squad with any specific expertise. There's no doubt about that. In fact, I can remember getting...
But I used to get advice from you.
You gathered it up along the way because fortunately there were a few people there that did know what was going on, like Cole Dyson and
that's right,
that
Cole
type of thing. So it was a pretty steep learning curve for a lot of people. And I remember pulling a sergeant's job while I was there, and there was an appeal on, and one of the appellates had actually gone through the crime statistics at Collaroy Police Station where I'd been hanging my hat on the brilliant job I'd done. And declared there hadn't been a fraud reported there for 4 years or something. And I remember the guy who was Jimmy Hill was sitting on and he said, so he was sort of representing me. And he said, well, okay, well, we've seen the strategies that Christie's obviously employing to prevent fraud at Collaroy are working well. What have you been doing?
There's a listener warning here, because otherwise they're going to wonder why I've got you on the podcast. You always diminish your capabilities, and it's something that the self-depreciation that we like about you. But I'm sure there was some crime at Collaroy, and if there wasn't, it was because they were too afraid to commit crime in your patch.
No, we had a few crimes, but it was. I mean, there was no way you were ever going to convince anyone that you weren't leading the good life working at Collaroy when you were hearing you'd get together with your old classmates were roaring around in Mount Druitt and all these other places.
There's certain police stations. I remember up at Port Macquarie Police Station, where I spent a large portion of my time investigating homicides, but I was standing there one day in the detective's office looking out on the Hastings River watching dolphins jump up out of the water.
Yes.
And I've gone, this is a nice place. And everyone in the office said, no, it's not that nice, because no one wanted the truth to get out.
That's right.
a good spot it was to be working at.
Any of those people that work in those country areas are very protective of the good spots.
Hang on to it.
Excuse me. Doesn't always work out for them, though, because in the end, someone comes in... It gets promoted into a position or whatever it is, and then you've got this drama on your hands where, all the experienced old dudes are still sitting there as career senior constables. The new bloke comes in, there's always friction, I mean, they just get... It's not always healthy, but you can understand why they want to hang on.
Yeah, well, that's another part of policing. If they've got a good location, they've maybe a young family, kids at school and all that.
You've got to weigh it up.
Do you want to get promoted and then end up back in the city?
And look, it's not all about promotion, is it?
No.
I mean, the young guy that I'm working with now, he's probably one of the smartest young guys I've had the pleasure of working with. But he left the police because there wasn't a career path through plain clothes anymore. You had to keep leaving and going and doing uniform work or other type of work to progress through the ranks. And all he wanted to do was investigate.
I think specialist skills are undervalued. Like there's this school of thought that we can just have generalist detectives and everyone can do a homicide, everyone can do a fraud or a drug job, all that. You've been in the business a long time. I've been in the business a long time. And we both know that specialist skills are needed for different areas.
Absolutely. Oh, you know who you reach out to when you... And, I mean, you've got to... I always admired the people that had... I mean, there's generic skills that work across the board. I understand that. But, I always admired the people that you could rely on in those really crunch moments when they're...
That's when you need them, isn't it? You need that drug squad expert or that gangs expert or whatever, robbery at those crucial times. The easy ones we can all do. That's granted. It's the tough ones.
It's probably right, and I mean it's a very ego-driven organisation at the CIB. I was about to say CIB. There's a blast from the past, but at that state crime level, where there's there's certainly, I guess, professional jealousies and things going along like that that occur. But
it's an alpha thing.
It is.
It really is.
But sometimes you're going to have those. You've got to have those people that really put the job first.
Yeah.
Come hell or high water,
Yeah, I agree with you, Dave. I think that's needed. In regards to fraud, how have you seen it change over the years? Like I talk my experiences in my early days in plain clothes, and it literally was the bounce check and simple things. Fraud's got a lot more complex.
Yeah, I guess it was back in the 80s and early 90s, and that it was more of a paper-based crime. It was. As you say, your check matters, your standard forgery, forge and other type matters. I mean, there was always the obtaining the 178 BA. Everybody knew that.
Benefit by deception. I still struggle with that in that it's virtually, you can find someone that's guilty of that for virtually anything.
Well, that's right.
And when I'd have someone and report something to me and the old Susan detective would go, nah, it's not a crime, it's a civil matter. I'm going, but hold it, they got the push bike they bought with that check that bounced or whatever. And
a lot of people, I mean, there's never been a crime that's been written off as not a crime more often than fraud over the years,
Yeah.
But I mean, deceit's the cornerstone to the crime type.
Yeah.
And it's just how many different ways you can do it. And I guess now they've moved, with the digital era and internets and all the rest of it. I mean, most of these people are fairly clever.
Yeah.
And they're only limited by their imagination as to how many different ways they can try and rip people off.
But with fraudsters, and you can jump in and tell me if I'm reading it right. What I found frustrating in investigating fraudsters, if I was after a bloke that done a stick up or someone that had broken into places, or even a murderer, invariably it comes to the point where the evidence is overwhelming and they go, yeah, you've got me. It gets to that point, even at some point in time. I can't remember a fraud person that's put their hand up to me and gone, oh yeah, they always seem to contest it. They've always got an excuse. They're going, look, you just don't understand, Gary, that I thought there was sufficient funds in that account and that was meant to move there and Dave was meant to transfer this.
Yeah.
And I sit there and just shake my head in disbelief.
It wasn't a phrase I heard a lot. Dave, you were too good for me. You've got me over the years. But
so they were lying because clearly you were.
Well, the thing with the fraud squad brief, in general terms, is the brief is done prior to the arrest. So you're not going
you
out.
Don't have to get that confession
on a hot job as a rule.
Yeah.
Where you've got to go out and work around the clock to try and prove the case or get this crazed fraudster off the street. We actually had I remember going. Craig Riddle, God rest his soul, he's passed away now, but he was. Leaving Strawberry Hill one day, screaming up the driveway in the car, and got onto the police radio, and I can't remember the call sign. It was like Sierra Charlie 123, urgent duty en route to St George Bank, Cogra, fraud in progress. That's it. I've never heard of fraud in progress being called on a radio in living memory.
An urgent duty run for it.
Absolutely, yeah. But look, they're above the average bear. Usually, a good fraudster, probably the really good ones, you'd never know because you probably don't catch them. But they're plausible. That's the cornerstone of their of their criminal capacity is the fact they can convince people to part with the hard earned. And
they've got to have a lot of front, haven't they?
Absolutely, and it can look you straight in the eye and tell you that what I'm telling you is the truth. I mean, they're fantastic at it.
Yeah,
and some of when you look at the amount of money that they're able to remove from people before their very eyes, it's quite astounding. And we over the years, I never ceased to amaze me how much money people were prepared to part with. When you looked at the circumstances.
I've often wondered that it's almost like you think, how could you be so stupid? But I think it's human nature to trust people. I get caught with some stuff outside the cops because, okay, when I'm in the cops, I'm looking for everyone's got an angle, what's going on. But you like to trust people, and I think that's what the fraudsters play on, the good nature of people.
Yeah, I think there used to be the old line, fraud squad protecting the greedy and stupid from the greedy and clever. That was a bit of a catch cry.
So run that past me again. So, fraud squad
protecting the greedy and stupid from the greedy and clever. And,
okay. Well, that's
And in some ways, it certainly rang true in some cases because there was usually a fair bait that was being dangled in front of somebody, which tickled their greed.
Yeah.
Meter and said, I'm in on this. But what we're seeing now is that there's other crimes out there now. These are the sad ones where you see the really vulnerable people getting taken for a ride.
But
they're not so much greedy. They're just
naive, trusting,
lonely, trusting, whatever.
But with your saying there, I remember someone came into a police station I was working at and wanted to report a fraud, and the uniformed staff referred him out to me in the detective's office. Sat down with him, had all this paperwork, and his fraud was that someone had a betting system that was guaranteed to win you.
Wouldn't we love one of those?
You put $100 in, and it's guaranteed to win you $1,000. And he was and this person just approached him at the pub, say, "I've got this good system, blah blah blah," and he had all the records there. And I remember sitting there, and I just didn't know, mate, how stupid could you be? And I think I made the point, going, if the system's that's good, why has he got to do door-to-door salesman selling the system and that? But this bloke was genuinely aggrieved and thought that he was a victim of a crime. But that is that greed that's just jumped in.
And this was quite often. People would come in and say, "I gave so many hundred thousands of dollars to Gary Jubelin," and Gary told me he's going to turn that 100,000 into $1 million in 12 months.
Yeah.
And how did he tell you he was going to do it? Well, I trusted him because he's Gary Jubelin, and I just trusted the fact that what he said was going to. So there was no terms of conditions in relation to what they were going to do.
Yeah.
No fraud. I mean, so if I go down and drop the 100,000 on the favourite in the first,
yeah,
and it goes down the gurgler, well, it's without having promised you I was going to do anything else.
Yeah,
I invested it in something. If it had come off, I would have been able to pay you. Now I just got a bad debt to you. I mean that's an extreme example.
Yeah, but
it illustrates the point.
The type of thing. There's a lot of stuff that there was a lot of division before they got the experts on fraud about what's a civil matter and what's a criminal matter. What's your take on that? Because that was always debated in the detective's office. Like, it's a civil matter. This person's, yeah.
Well, I always used to tell people that were asking me, but in relation to that, is that you've got to look for the deceit.
Yep.
The subjective dishonesty. Cole Dyson used to drum that into me all the time.
Okay.
I think actually the stated case in relation to that was something that sticks in my mind. It was Christie versus Lachinsky.
Did you get caught?
Finally caught up with me.
Yeah.
But it's definitely when you're looking for where's the fraud aspect to it. So how did they convince this person to part with their money?
Yeah.
And it will invariably be some sort of deceitful practice, whether it's a false document, a false statement, just something along that, a lie that convinces somebody to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. There's got to be that.
But being able to demonstrate that was deceitful, like they didn't own that property.
Done with intent to defraud. Yeah, that's the thing, as opposed to just some throwaway line or, as I said before, just give me some money and I'll try and turn it into something else. Well, that is a civil matter.
Yeah, yeah. One of the high-profile ones in the past 12 months has been that Melissa Kadich.
Yeah.
And I did some work on that just from the media point of view, and so got a pretty good understanding of what went on there. But the devastation that person caused with people losing can you imagine working your 37 years in the cops and then you've got your super all sorted and you're going to live happily ever after and then you've just lost it?
Yeah,
and that's what I think people, fraud that doesn't get put up there. But that really brought it home to me, watching the victims that had lost their life savings. And we were going to retire and we're going to move into a house in here, but now we're going to have to move away and we can't afford that and we're going to have to work for the next 20 years. But
well, she'd be that classic profile of somebody who's very plausible.
Yep.
Those Ponzi schemes.
Yeah, talk us about the Ponzi schemes, because I know what it is now, but a lot of people ask me what exactly a Ponzi scheme is.
Well, I suppose in short, it's a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. So X amount of dollars come in.
Yep.
They're meant to be investing those dollars in certain financial instruments in order to grow the nest egg.
Yep.
Something usually goes wrong.
Yeah.
Or if it's going to be a rort from day one, they're obviously taking that money and using it for their own benefit
money
from
out,
day one,
knowing that it's going to blow
up. And it
up.
just gets this washing machine effect where if you've got enough cash going around in a circle, if somebody's wants to get out, they're able to take their money out, but you've got to keep pulling money in to keep the scheme going. And as I say, with Ponzi schemes, I think sometimes they start off with good, solid, honest intent.
Yeah.
but then something goes wrong, and rather than put the hand up and say, well, I've made an error or it hasn't gone as well, they'll try and cover their tracks with it.
Yeah.
And then they get behind the 8 ball, and then it's a case of, having to keep pulling money in so that the balloon doesn't go up. I don't know if that's the case with the Caddick matter.
Yeah,
I mean, it's post my time, but just on the people that I've spoken to that were relatively close to it, I get the impression that she may have was ready to do the wrong thing from day one.
Yeah, it seemed it was inevitable that it was going to collapse at some point in time. That was my observation.
Well, they always seem to give people this feeling that they say, like, look, I can't take you on board yet. My book's full. I'd love to. Yes, we are bringing in these magnificent returns. I remember this going on like through the bloody financial crisis when there wasn't a. You were lucky to be getting anything.
Yeah.
And they're wheeling in 10% a month. And, but anyway, people get taken in by it and then think, gee, I wished I could get into something like that. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, a spot becomes available. Guess what? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Someone's dropped out or pulled out. So, yes, in you come and you think, God, I'm that lucky to get there. And then all the documentation is fantastic. I remember George Ballos doing this. He was running the, inverted commas, British Marine Bank, I think it was. And he had magnificent documentation.
Just forged documentation?
Well, just created.
Yeah.
They were just complete and utter bullshit. Here's your investment. You're just watching it grow before your eyes. But I mean, it's just.
But because quite often you pay those people to look after your finances because you don't want to do it yourself because you put the trust in the accountant or whatever to manage your funds. And I don't want to put it out there publicly, but I reckon I'd be a classic to get ripped off because I'd just be going, all right, no, thank you. It's
well, there's no doubt there's people that take a punt or they're high risk.
Yeah, well,
they're not risk averse. They're the total opposite, and they don't mind having a go. Well, I mean, all right, you go in, buyer beware. But if you're a relatively conservative individual with your money. And you're seeing opportunities around that are basically not afforded to any other person out there. That's when the red flag should be going up. But there's that other little head comes out of the side of your neck going, "What if it?" The little greedy man. It goes,
you're fighting with the
having a little fight with the good and bad side of your being, but.
I don't know what it was about the Melissa Kadich one that attracted everyone's attention as much, but I think people could see, and some of the victims that spoke in the media about it, some of the people that had lost their money, I think that brought it home because they were, I won't say battlers, but they'd worked hard all their life to set themselves up, and that was taken, and that's a horrendous.
Oh.
Yeah.
Look, that is, and they're the sad, they're the really sad stories. People, I see it now I've had people ring me over the years because they knew I worked in that area, and old people that have been ripped off. They're in for retirement villages, for God's sake. And someone's
still
just they phoned them up and we've got this great idea for you, and our boiler room type stuff. And they can't afford to be. They're struggling to make ends meet.
And
anyway.
It's not just the financial hit, but the emotional stress and worry. And
there's no doubt that. For any of us that have probably had any financial dramas in our life at some stage or another, you know how it does impact you. I mean, that's not something you want to be living with at that stage in your life.
Exactly. Well, look, we might wrap up part one at this stage, and when we come back, I want to talk about some of the larger investigations you worked on as a fraud investigator, and one of the most and we're talking about this the other day, despicable crimes where the romance, the relationship scams that we're talking about preying on vulnerable people. It's absolutely atrocious.
Straight out of Central Casting for that.
What happens there. So we'll take a break, and when we're back in part two, we'll talk about some of the larger investigations and speak soon.
Good as gold.